I'm Matt Davio with the One Minute Trader, and I am back today. We always talk about positive diversions. I'm here with old friend Mark Garbin. Mark is the founder of Coherent Capital. He sits on a number of mutual fund boards, along with some alternative investment futures types product boards. And he's written a new book following his novel Whiskey and Romance in Manhattan. Now he's got a rare New York neighborhood guide, how to find good whiskey and romance in Manhattan. Mark, thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
A pleasure, Matt. It's good to see you again. I don't know anything that drives people to drink more than the markets.
That's true. Now, as I told you right before we started this, whiskey, I used to enjoy a good scotch or two or three or seven. But for some reason, like when I hit 30, it just became much more difficult for me to drink the distilled products. Not that there's anything wrong with them. I think, matter of fact, if you can drink them in small quantities and sip them, they're very fine to do. So how did you go from this is a diversion for you, right? Because you're very active still in the markets, futures, stock futures, single stock futures, working with these mutual funds. How did you happen to find time to write a couple books?
Yeah, it's a great question, Matt. My experience with folks that are in our business is that we're in our business because it's in our blood. And because it's in our blood, it seems to occupy a great deal of thought, both on and off market hours. And I was looking for, how do I take my mind off of the markets? Because you can get really wrapped up in them.
Unhealthily so.
Yes, unhealthily so. And it seems sort of like an oxymoron or a tautology to say that you can cure your stock market addiction with something other than stock market, but you can use another addictive device to do it, which is whiskey. And so, to your point, it's not about drinking a lot; it's about drinking better. And it's finding the best places to really sit back and enjoy what you're drinking, and hopefully, you've got some companion with you,
right?
Whether it's a girlfriend, boyfriend, or spouse, that you can just relax and have a conversation and just remember what it was like a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away when you actually talk to each other without looking at your phones.
Yes.
And so, or what I call in the book, bandwidth bombardment. And so they say everybody's got a novel. And it turned out that I did. And so about 4 years ago, I had a novel published. The novel is called No Fingerprints, and it's a pictorial novel. So it's got 40 full-color pictures and maps. The genre is a lot like Frederick Forsyth, so it's a thriller. And it's about the secret destruction of Iran's nuclear capability.
Okay.
It's just what everybody wants to do, right, in their spare time.
So you must have done a lot of research on both the subject of where you live along with Iran.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the people that helped in that book were, some of them had classified access that, of course, they didn't share with me any classified information, but they had an insight to them. They had an approach to them that just rubbed off. And almost it's curious, because what you really want is, what are the right questions to ask versus the right answers to get. If you don't ask the right questions, you don't get the right answers. And those people were acknowledged. Most of them were acknowledged in the book's acknowledgement section. There are a number of people who helped who didn't want to be acknowledged, a number of those in Iran. But as a practical matter, it's a discrete problem.
Right.
And what I would do is try to figure out, how do you solve this discrete problem? And I would go to coffee shops, and I would, during the day, and I'd write after the market hours or on the weekend. And I'd just sit down with my laptop and I'd plug in. And the coffee shops I found had to have several attributes. They had to have great coffee, duh.
Mm-hmm.
They had to have really good grilled cheese sandwiches.
Nice.
They had to have lots of power outlets and great Wi-Fi.
Right.
And so what you do, you plug in, and there's a buzz. And you just pound away, you write for hours, and then you're exhausted. And so what I would then do is I would wind up going to these whiskey bars just to have a drink, a nice drink. Nothing, as I said to people, I don't drink anything younger than 18 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you can vote, I'll drink it.
Yeah. So, so when did you start the project? Then when you're sitting there drinking a whiskey, and then you find another whiskey place, and you're like, hey,
right. Something
probably went off in your head that said, I got something here. Because it's whiskey is definitely trendy. The distillery business is trendy. As I mentioned to you before, there's even a couple distilleries here that I know focusing on both gin, vodka, and even some whiskeys, and which and the big beer makers here, like Deschutes, the big small brewers, but Deschutes cracks the top 20 now nationally, by the way, as far as a small brewery. But they are distilling a number of their brews in whiskey barrels with whiskey. So and are hugely popular, by the way, from the tap in small batch amounts with their beer. And I've tried a couple of them, and I got to say, they are good.
Oh, that is what you've hit on is a real explosion in the craft spirits business. And it's not just that you find it in Bend, you find it all over. I was in Philadelphia, and I went to a distillery there, and I found out that 10 years ago, there were something like 5 distilleries active in Pennsylvania. My numbers might be wrong, but you'll get the idea how it exploded. There's now over 250.
In Philly?
In the Pennsylvania area.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's crazy.
It's crazy. New York changed its laws a number of years ago, and it's an explosion of them.
Yeah, so I mean, and so I'm in Oregon, and we have very liberal. We have liberal brewing and distilling laws, and beer is sold in bike shops, right? You get your bike fixed, and you can get a tap beer. I mean, it's literally like coffee shops, and it's the craziest thing, because growing up in Michigan, it was you could go to a bar, of course, and get. We didn't have crazy usury laws, but it was difficult and very expensive to open a bar without hugely expensive liquor licenses.
Right.
And it's just not that. But the thing here in Oregon is we do have state-controlled liquor stores on the opposite end of the distilled side. So you can have like a sampling room or a bar that can sell liquor, and that's much more expensive, but it's still relatively cheap versus, back east. So you said that changed in New York. Does that mean that really opened up the opportunities for people then to open and sell their product more readily?
Yeah, that's a great point, Matt. And that's actually quite true.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to a distillery in New York State, and they've got tasting rooms, and some of them really do it up well.
Right.
And it's almost like its own cocktail bar. In fact, so let me take you back, and I'll segue into that, because it's a great point. So I was writing this novel, and I would compile this list of bars that I would go to, and people would come over to the house for dinner. My wife and I would be talking to them, and they say, "How's the book going?" And I said, "Well, I've gone to this bar after I've written the book," and I started compiling a list. I said, "Well, where have you gone?"
Yeah.
And so I give them the list, and they say, "These places are great."
Yeah. So they started going to the places that you were recommending.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it got up to be about a little over a dozen places. And one person said, "You ought to write a book about it." So, I said, "Oh, okay." And so I filled it out. There are 28 places in Manhattan and 4 in the Westchester County area, just the immediate suburbs. And I found 17 great whiskey shops, and there are 20 outstanding cheap dates that I put together. So you buy a bottle and you go, you want to have a nice cheap date. And so it's one of the things is that you can get a small bottle of whiskey at these shops, and so you don't have to pay for this big clinking 1 liter bottle. You used to be for the, it's called the homeless, now for the millennials and for the older folks who just want to have a nice date and just sit in a park, watch things go by, or go grab some French fries. And so alcohol and French fries always go together. It's a 2-course meal. And so, but talking about distilleries, a number of the distilleries I went to, 3 of them are in the book. One is Green Hook Ginsmiths, which is made in Brooklyn, in the Greenpoint section of Brooklyn. One of the finest gins I've actually ever had. And I keep my gins and vodkas in the freezer. So I put it in the freezer, it makes a fantastic martini. Then there's the Van Brunt Stillhouse in the Red Hook section of Brooklyn, down by the water in South Brooklyn. And they make a whole host of brown whiskeys and white whiskeys. And they have a whole bar set up. And for a very inexpensive amount of money, you can go down and taste all the whiskeys, have cocktails, and it's a bar area. And you can have a lot of fun, and it's very inexpensive. You can even take a boat from Wall Street down to there and take the boat back. You don't even have to drive.
That's great information. And you're talking about a niche and a date and a night out that people probably haven't considered. This whole, it's a nice way to go to a bar without having to, battle the teens and the 20-somethings, right?
Oh, absolutely. And generally speaking, as you get older in life, and you don't have to be follically challenged like me.
Or me.
Really. But you want to drink better. And you don't want to necessarily scream at the person that you're talking to. You want to have a conversation. And so that's what happened with the book, how it developed. The book is called Whiskey and Romance Manhattan.
So your wife is a Michigan grad, like I am, and it is Michigan State Week. So I will probably be wearing this as close to my body as I can all week. Go blue. But was she was she a whiskey drinker before you started this project?
She likes certain whiskeys. She is quite fond of Cosmopolitans when she can have one, which is a vodka and cranberry based drink. She has graduated to some of the bourbons, and bourbons can run anywhere from the hot, very alcoholic, to more of the less alcoholic and sweeter, on the sweeter side. And so you have a drink like an old fashioned, where you can make either out of bourbon or out of rye. Those drinks can be, if you do it right, they can be just wonderful accompaniments to food, or even just as a plain cocktail that you're going to enjoy.
So let's use your wife, the bourbon or rye for the uninitiated. What would you say to people is the difference between the types of whiskeys that people would want to look at that are naive and don't have great experience? Because there's probably something for everybody, like your wife and me, but I just am unaware of it.
And it's a great question, Matt. Rye and bourbon differ from the standpoint of their ingredients. Bourbon is primarily corn, made from corn. Whereas rye can have some corn, has definitely rye in it, some wheat. Sometimes it's more of a blend. But the taste differentials are can be quite striking depending on which one you're talking about. And so the way to find out about it is kind of an experiment. And in New York, there are, as well as there are in a number of places in the country, there are specialty bars. Some are extremely romantic, that will give you a tasting. And the tasting, you'll set up a board and you can get anywhere from 4 to 8.
Perfect.
And not going to get the full pour. You're going to get maybe a half or a quarter pour, but it'll give you an idea of run through the bourbons from the low alcohol to the higher alcohol, from the drier to the sweet. And then you look at the ryes and you do the same thing. And it's fun if you take a friend or you take your wife or girlfriend, boyfriend, and you run through them. Probably my favorite place, there are two great places that are in the book. One is a place called On the Rocks in Manhattan. It's in a section called Hell's Kitchen, which is not too far from Times Square. And it's extremely dark, votive candles all over the place. And people there just love to have fun, and they just go there. It's a serious place to understand and experiment with whiskey. And the crowd is a little older, but it can get crowded late at night because of the nature of New York. But it's a great place to experiment. And the bartender, a guy named Josh, is fantastic, and he'll help you walk through that. The other place is in Wall Street, the Wall Street area. It's called Vintry, and it's on what is arguably New York's oldest continuous street, called Stone Street. And that's what it is. It's a cobblestone street. And in beautiful weather like this, we're going to have a day in the 70s in New York City, they have tables that are outside on the street. And you can then go inside where it's quite dark, and they have also a great wine list. They're known as a Wine Spectator winner for wine. So you can taste wines, you can take whiskeys, and you can experiment anywhere from the low budget all the way up to the high budget. And they won't stop you from experimenting with the very high budget whiskeys. So you at least can see the range of flavors that you're talking about.
That's great. I mean, because it's, as you said, it's an expensive proposition to try a bottle at a time, but to go to one of the two establishments that you've suggested, Mark, and get a board of 4 to 8, they do the same with beer. And I have seen it. There is a place in Bend here called I think it's Stihl, Stihl, and it's a distillery, and they do the same, the sampling of the whiskeys. I have not done it. I need to do it. So thank you. That's a great idea. But let's hear more. So you basically attacked, it sounds like 40 to 60 locations between distilleries, bars, and blind pigs. I don't, what other
due diligence was killer.
But what a great project, and what a great title, because to your point, we need more romance and we need more fun in our lives away from the screens. And what a great way to do this, because you've got a simple social activity with people that are passionate about life and passionate about whiskeys and open to trying new things. What a great thing. It must have been fun.
Oh, it was a lot of fun. And the idea is to get passionate about the whiskey and then get passionate about each other.
Right. And so again, bringing it back to your wife, how has that worked out for you?
Fantastic. Fantastic.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And does she? And if you were to ask her, for a favorite that she likes, so some of our female listeners, what would you recommend, first or second try, or give us 3 selections maybe?
Okay. Well, depends on whether you want a cocktail or whether you want a straight whiskey. Okay. So if you're looking for a cocktail to start you off, I would start off with a Manhattan. Which is a bourbon with sweet vermouth and maraschino cherry, and a little bit of sweet bitters. I would start off with an old-fashioned, which is more of a rye drink. Start with rye, and old-fashioned is a sugar cube with some bitters, some rye, and just some ice. Right. And what will happen is all the flavors will infuse, and it will not taste alcoholic at all.
Yeah, they can be dangerous.
It can be very dangerous, especially. And I'm not getting paid for this. This is a plug. There's a distillery in New York called Hudson Distillers. They're located, I think, in Orange County, New York, which is just a bit southwest of Albany, the state capital. and they make a maple cask rye, which is just so smooth. And you use that in the old fashioned, and you might be a convert for life.
It's probably like drinking Aunt Jemima with a little alcohol.
It's a bit like that. It's sort of like you're having your sweet pancakes with maple syrup, and you're feeling a whole lot better and a whole less filled.
So describe the way that you would drink give me a couple whiskeys then. So we have a couple drinks for the uninitiated, and I won't just say ladies. Those both sound good to me, by the way, and I want to try both of those. But what would you say on the rocks then? Whiskey, both rye, bourbon. What would you recommend there?
Okay, so let's try rye, bourbon, and Scotch and its derivatives. Since I'm a derivatives geek anyway, so I always love derivatives. Whether it's
bring that in. We are both derivatives geeks. You got to bring in the CFA somewhere. You got to put that. You got to put that to work.
Yeah, and so let's start with rye. I mentioned that the maple cask rye, which is truly a very, very good, easygoing rye. And then you can go to the Five Fathers rye, which I think is from Maysville, Kentucky, which is a little bit on the hotter side and more tangy. And so you can go from that in that spectrum. Mm-hmm. In the bourbon side, bourbon has so many nuances, and it doesn't have to just come from Kentucky. Although having lived in Louisville, I will tell you that most people will say that any bourbon outside of Kentucky is not bourbon.
Right.
But I beg to differ on that, and I'll tell you why in a second. But I'd say if you want to start out with a bourbon, a really easy bourbon, Basil Hayden's, which is 80 proof, is a very light and easy way to move in to a bourbon, and it won't insult you. It's sort of like the middle of the road way to travel.
Okay.
Then in the other, an unusual one is a New York-based bourbon called Hill Rock, and Hill Rock is made in what they call a Solera, which is a very unusual way to make both whiskey and wine. And what you do is you fill up a cask, and you let it age for a while. And then what you do is you draw off some of that aged whiskey and you put in some new whiskey and let that age some more. And so you constantly refresh the whiskey barrel. And the Solera, what happens is it winds up being very smooth and very flavorful, depending on the barrel that you use, which is usually American oak. Yeah. And the Hill Rock Solera bourbon is just a true, lovely, easygoing, but yet flavorful bourbon. And then you can go to a Van Brunt Stillhouse, or any, which is a New York City-based bourbon, which I was talking about, which is more in the classic case, or you can look at a 1709, or a Jefferson's, even a Maker's Mark. And those will be the classic bourbons that people have been used to drinking. But so you can start, though, with the small, easygoing Basil Hayden. You can move to the Hill Rock Solera. And if you like that, you can then move into the more traditional.
Gotcha.
Okay, in single malts, you basically have three types. You have your blended whiskeys, which are like Johnny Walkers, your Cutty Sarks, your Dewar's. And Dewar's is more on the light side. You've got Cutty Sark, which is also a bit on the light side. And then you can move into a Johnny Walker Black or a Double Black, which is very much on the heavier side and can be more peaty. Most Scotch whiskeys and single malts will have a peat flavor to them. The single malts basically are made in a single still.
Okay.
And they're casked by themselves. And you can go anywhere from a Glenmorangie, which is pretty easy going, but is an unusual, sophisticated palate, You can go all the way up through a more either peaty, which is like a Lafroig or a Lagavulin, or you can go to a very more sweet sherry cask oriented, which is the Macallan. So if you go to a bar like a Vintry or an On the Rocks, tell them what you would like to do, or even ask the bartenders how they could take you on a taste tour through Scotland.
Yeah.
Okay, and that can be a whole lot of fun. And if you're with two people, what's really fun is if you get 4 and your partner gets 4, you can then drink all 8. You can travel all through Scotland and taste the differences.
You're inspiring me, and it's 9:30 in the morning here. It's 12:30 on your clock, so that's bad, Mark.
Well, the last one about the whiskeys are what I would call the 2 brilliant, let's call it outliers.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is Irish, and the second is Japanese.
Okay, this I want to hear.
Okay, the Irish whiskeys, the best way to put them are Scotch without smoke.
Huh.
And so you get anywhere from the lighter touch, which is like a Tullamore Dew, all the way up through a Middleton's, which is very rare and is going to be extraordinarily, let's call it explosively flavorful.
Okay.
But the Japanese whiskeys also have their own spectrum of flavors, anywhere from a 12-year-old going all the way up through an 18-year-old. And going through the Japanese whiskeys, which are made in a Scotch whiskey style, so it's somewhat smoky and peaty, but you can start out with a light one, which is a Yamazaki 12, and you can go into, or a Hibiki 12, you can go all the way up to the Hibiki 17 and the Yamazaki 18. And what you'll find is a level of sophistication and differentiation from Scotch that will take any, let's call it hardened Scotch drinker, and open up a new world. And so when you go to a bar and you go with someone and you have these tastings, it is one of the most fun things you can do. It can bring, alcohol brings people closer.
Yep.
Sometimes the objective is to, how do I put it, get as close as you possibly can, which is...
Hence the whiskey and romance. Well, it warms the cockles and warms the heart, I would say.
Exactly. And so it's all about fun. And so after a day in the markets, a day dealing with futures, derivatives, and even things like stocks and bonds, sometimes a night out in the town that will take you out of your own, let's call it financial world, into a world of reconnecting.
So where's the place you want to take your special someone next, maybe that you haven't, Mark, and maybe you've tried, but you're like, wow, I really have to take her there. She'll love this place. What little treat can you tell our listeners today that, hey, check out this place. You'll really score some points.
Okay. Let's talk about, I'll give you 3 places. And the reason I'll give you 3 is because they're geographically dispersed.
Perfect.
And if you're in our business, in the financial business, where you are sometimes matters to minimize transportation.
Yes.
And sometimes you don't want to minimize it. You want to take an excursion, and I'll tell you about that in a second. So 3 places. The first place to go is a place called the Brandy Library. It's in the lower part of Manhattan. It's in an area called Tribeca. And it has a very, very long list of whiskeys. And it's got really good food. Not too heavy, and you'll see pictures in the book. So the book's got 150 full-color pictures and maps in it. So you'll actually be able to see where you want to go.
Cool.
But the Brandy Library also has, and I encourage people to get on their mailing list, emailing list, because they have distillers that come in for tastings. These are free tastings. And so I happened to go about a month and a half ago to a Balvenie tasting. which is one of the great single malt distillers in all of Scotland. And they had a 12-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 21-year-old, plus two single cask, a 12 and a 15 single cask. So you had 6 different whiskeys. You tasted the entire panoply of their offerings. And it's just a lot of fun. And then afterwards, you can stay at the Brandy Library, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful place.
Awesome.
So that's one special someone. The next place I would go would be a place called Rarities. And Rarities is like an old English club. It is quiet. It's luxurious. It has wonderful corners. It has a service motif that is second to none. And they know instinctively when to hover and refresh your drink and when to stay away.
I like it.
And that's in Midtown.
Okay.
It's in the Lottie Palace Hotel. The third place is a place that you would go to Grand Central Terminal, which is one of the big train stations in New York.
Mm-hmm.
You would get on the Metro North train to Hastings-on-Hudson.
Okay.
Okay, which is about a half an hour away max. You get off there and you make a 3-minute walk, and there's a place called Harvest-on-Hudson. And it's a restaurant and a bar. And it has an outdoor restaurant and an outdoor patio.
Okay.
That faces the river. Now, one of the things about the Hudson River is technically it's not a river. Mm-hmm. It's a fjord, which is a tidal basin. And so the tides will move upriver and then will move down. Mm-hmm. And at Hastings, when the tides are changing, it's like the river stops.
Cool.
And at the sunset, you get a blood orange sunset reflecting off of a sedentary river while you're drinking a cocktail outside.
Yeah. And as you said, the fall foliage, 70 degrees in New York today, October 3rd, that would be a great time of year to do that, it sounds like.
It's perfect. So those are the 3 places that I would take. And I've actually taken my wife to them. So, and she loves them.
Well, Mark, I mean, Whiskey and Romance Manhattan, a rare New York neighborhood guide. I mean, the way you describe in your words, I definitely want to read the book now. I have not, completely read it. I've got a copy of it here, but I want to read it. You do a fantastic job with your wordsmanship and describing something that you're very passionate about, and that is whiskey and great places. I wouldn't want to. This is the way I would want to drink whiskey if I were a whiskey drinker. I would want to be very social and out and either with my significant other or with a group. It just sounds fantastic. And I can't wait to read your next book that is broadly covering a larger geography beyond, say, Manhattan. I bet you there could be a fantastic second offering that you could bring out.
Yeah, the conflict there is, do I move to places where I've lived too, which is Washington, D.C.
Right.
I might do Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia combined.
Well, you might have to go for the summer months or something when the markets are a little bit slower, and maybe you could wrap in both business and pleasure during the warm months. I don't know.
Well, when we think about it, the markets are conducive to imbibing alcohol, but particularly after they close, depending on whether you're up or you're down, you're either celebrating or commiserating.
So one final question as it relates to whiskey.
Sure.
Your best celebratory and your best, there will be tomorrow whiskeys.
Okay. Well, those are 2 great questions. Celebratory whiskey. And let's call it the lights will come on tomorrow, so it's Annie. I would say I'll start with the bad news. There is nothing better than losing yourself after a really bad day in the markets. There's nothing better than losing yourself in tequila. Okay.
Do you have a favorite?
Sure, I have the Añejo Cuervo 1800.
Perfect. I've had that one.
Okay, and the only challenge with that is that it's so good, you might have more and more. And the good news is that you might forget exactly what happened the day before.
Exactly. That's the goal. Tomorrow will come. That's the whole thing.
The bad news is make sure that if you're with somebody that they really love you, because tequila is a truth drug. Yeah. And you will wind up saying things that are completely true, but you might not have wanted to say it.
Okay. And your celebratory whiskey?
Well, I have a personal celebratory whiskey, but it's not what I would call for the budget conscious. I have a 50-year-old bottle of Glen Grant, which I got in London, which is extremely difficult to get. But my celebratory whiskey actually is a whiskey that is a bit on the expensive side, but not too much so. And it's the Balvenie 21-year-old Portwood, which is a single malt, which has a smoothness and a complexity of flavor that with a little peat, but not very much that is overpowering, matured in Portwood cask, so you get that port sensation out of the whiskey. And the combination is just sublime. So that's a celebratory.
Awesome.
That's what I drank when I passed my third exam in my CFA.
I like it. Thank you, Mark. Hey, Mark, it's been great having you on, and really, this is a really fascinating book and concept, and I'm sure it's going to do extremely well. One more question. Here we are, just entering the final quarter of 2017. Give us one big macro idea you think that may play out, next 6 to 12 months for volatility. Are you long, short, neutral? Where are you on that?
I'm going long volatility.
Okay.
And the reason is even though we're in a Goldilocks equity market, at some point in time, either through trading because bad things happen in the world, which send volatility spiking, and you can, if you're a quick swing trader, you can take a number of significant profits out of the market. And when you look at your downside, where it is, your downside is not going to be as great as it is right now.
Right.
So for example, if you're in the single digits in volatility, how far down are you going to go?
Well, unless we break to a whole new zone that we've never seen, which is possible.
It is possible. Yeah. Yes, and you could see some common sense break out in Washington, you could see a 10% tax on repatriated profits, which would mean more stock buybacks and bigger dividends. You could see tax reform going through, which generates 3% GDP growth, which can drive volatility down below 9. Okay, so that's a 10% move down, perhaps.
Right.
But when you go from 9 up to 14, 15, 16 because of bad things, you just basically want to do the opposite of what Taleb said. You don't want to be picking up pennies in front of a steamroller. What you want to be doing is putting those pennies there. So take a few small losses and prepare yourself for big jumps.
Couldn't agree more. Matter of fact, the Taleb analogy is spot on. It's there's been probably no bigger amount of sellers and volatility than we've ever. We're there right now. And to your point, who knows what it's going to be that's going to make it double, triple, possibly quadruple 5-bagger. So why wouldn't you want to take, a 10% risk to make a 500% possible upside?
That's right.
Makes a lot of sense to me.
And so that's the macro view from here.
Well, Mark,
and your mileage may vary.
well, Mark, I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on, and I want to wish you much success with Whiskey and Romance Manhattan, a rare New York neighborhood guide. I am going to read it over the next couple of days. As I told you before we came on, I'm pretty bored with this market, and I'm with you on the long volatility. And I bought it a little earlier than you are saying today, so I am down a little bit, not 10%, but I'm down a few percentage points. So, but the best trades, I always say, Mark, and you'd probably agree, have to go against you at some point before they pay you big.
That's right.
And would you say that's a good analogy for the best whiskeys?
Oh, absolutely.
You have to go through some bad ones before you find the real nuggets.
Well, it's the same thing in life. You got to kiss a lot of frogs.
All right. For 1 Minute Trader, I'm Matt Davio. Thanks again, Mark, for coming on. We appreciate your time, and we will talk soon.
Terrific. Thanks, Matt.